I wake up before the sun most mornings, not because I have to, but because sleep comes lightly when you grow older. The house is quiet at that hour, the kind of quiet that hums softly, like an old lullaby. I sit up slowly, careful with my knees, and rest my feet on the wooden floor that still creaks in the same places it did 40 years ago. That sound always makes me smile. It reminds me that this house remembers me, even when people forget to. I wrap my cardigan around my shoulders and walk to the kitchen. The kettle goes on the stove, and the little blue flame flickers like it knows my routine. While the water warms, I open the curtains just a little. Dawn in our town is gentle. The sky starts pale pink over the maple tree, and the birds begin their chatter before anyone else has something to say. I pour my tea into the same chipped mug I've had since my husband bought it for me at a roadside shop in Ohio. He said it looked sturdy, like me. I didn't believe him back then. I do now. I carry my tea out to the porch and sit in the rocking chair he built with his own hands. The wood is worn smooth where my fingers rest, and sometimes I imagine his hand still there, warm and steady. From the porch, I can see my little white car parked by the fence. It isn't fancy. The paint has faded, and the radio only plays one station clearly. But that car is mine. It has carried groceries, grandchildren, casseroles, and memories through every season of my life. Driving has always meant freedom to me. When I was younger, it meant taking my babies to doctor visits, school plays, and baseball practice. Later, it meant visiting my mother when she was sick, bringing soup to neighbors, and chasing sunsets when my husband needed to forget a hard week. Now, it means something quieter. It means I can still go where I want without asking anyone. It means I still belong to myself. I sip my tea and watch the empty road. Around 7, Mrs. Carter walks her dog past my house. She always waves, and I wave back, and we never say much else. That's how small towns are. We know each other's stories without telling them. By 8, I'm in the kitchen making oatmeal. I hum an old song without realizing it. The spoon taps the pot, and for a moment I feel young again, like I'm cooking breakfast before waking my children for school. My son loved cinnamon back then. He'd run into the kitchen with messy hair and sleepy eyes, asking if he could drive with me to school that day. He liked sitting in the front seat like a little king. I still remember teaching him how to drive. We went to an empty parking lot on a Sunday afternoon. His hands shook on the steering wheel, and he kept asking if he was doing it right. I told him, "You'll get there, honey. Just breathe." He did get there. He got his license. He drove across states chasing his dreams. And every mile he went, a part of me went with him. After breakfast, I tidy the kitchen slowly. I like things in their place. It makes the day feel steady. Then I go to my bedroom, brush my silver hair, and pin it up the way my mother taught me. I pick a soft blue dress, the one that doesn't wrinkle much. Today is grocery day. I need milk, bread, and those cookies my grandson likes when he visits on weekends. Before leaving, I sit on the edge of my bed and look at the old photo on my nightstand. My husband stands there smiling, arm around me, our son between us holding a toy truck. We looked tired, but proud. We had so little money back then, but we had each other. I whisper a little prayer like I always do. Keep my family safe. Keep my heart gentle. Then I take my purse, check for my glasses, and reach for the car keys hanging by the door. They jingle softly in my hand, a small familiar sound that tells me the day is mine. Outside, the air is crisp. I walk slowly to the car and run my hand along the hood like greeting an old friend. The door opens with that familiar click, and the seat hugs me just right. I turn the key, and the engine hums awake like it recognizes me. I don't drive fast anymore. I don't need to. I drive carefully, like every mile is something to be thankful for. The grocery store is only 10 minutes away, but those 10 minutes belong to me. The road curves past the church where I sang in the choir, the school where my children learned their ABCs, and the park where my husband and I used to sit on Sundays sharing a sandwich. Sometimes, when the sun hits the windshield just right, I see memories floating in the light. My son laughing in the back seat. My daughter braiding my hair. My husband squeezing my hand at a red light. Life moves on, but it never really leaves you. I know people think old age is quiet and small, but inside me, There are still highways, laughter, heartbreak, and courage. There are miles I've traveled, and miles I still want to. That morning felt like any other. Peaceful, ordinary, full of small blessings. I didn't know that by evening, something precious would be taken from me, without a word. I didn't know that my quiet life was about to change. But sitting on that porch, with the tea warm in my hands and the car shining softly in the morning light, I felt whole. I felt strong. I felt like myself. And sometimes, that's all a woman really needs. It was a Thursday afternoon when my son came over without calling. That alone was unusual. He's a busy man now, always rushing between meetings, phone calls, and errands for his own children. When he visits, he usually sends a quick text first. "Mom, I'll stop by around 6. That day, I heard his truck pull into the driveway just after lunch, loud and sudden like a storm that didn't warn the sky. I was in the kitchen rinsing my teacup. The sound of his engine made me smile before I even turned around. There's something about hearing your child's footsteps, no matter how old they get. It still feels like a blessing. I dried my hands on a towel and walked to the door. When I opened it, he was already halfway up the porch, carrying that worried look he wears when he's thinking too hard. "Hey, Mom," he said, kissing my cheek quickly. "Hey, sweetheart," I answered. "You didn't call. Everything okay?" He nodded, but his eyes didn't match his words. Yeah, everything's fine. I just wanted to check on you." I stepped aside and let him in. He walked through the living room slowly, glancing at the furniture, the pictures, the little details like he was seeing them for the first time. I offered him tea, and he said yes, but he didn't sit down right away. He stood near the window looking out at my car. "You still driving every day?" he asked casually. I poured the tea. "Not every day. Just when I need groceries or church or the doctor." "Why?" He shrugged. "Just asking." We sat at the table together, steam rising from our cups. For a while we talked about small things, his kids' school, the weather, a neighbor who moved away. But something heavy hung between us, like words waiting at the door. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Mom, I've been thinking about something." I looked up. "That sounds serious." He gave a tight smile. "You know I worry about you." I laughed softly. "You've worried about me since you were 10 years old, and thought I drove too fast." He didn't laugh back. "Mom," he said gently, "you're getting older. Driving isn't as easy as it used to be." The words were quiet, but they hit hard. I stared into my tea, watching the little circles on the surface. "I drive fine," I said. "Slow, careful. No tickets. No accidents." "I know," he replied quickly. "But things can change fast. Your reaction time, your eyesight, it's not about blame. It's about safety." I nodded slowly because I didn't want to argue. I've always hated arguing. It makes love feel like it's cracking. But something in my chest tightened. "Did something happen?" I asked. He shook his head. "No. I just think maybe it's time we start thinking about alternatives. I can drive you. Or we can get groceries delivered. There are services now." I looked at him then. Really looked. The boy who once begged me to let him steer for a minute was now telling me to let go of the wheel forever. "I like driving," I said softly. "It keeps me independent." He sighed. "Mom, independence isn't worth risking your life." We sat in silence for a moment. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. I could hear my heart beating louder than it should. Then he stood up suddenly and walked toward the hallway. "Where are you going?" I asked. "Just grabbing something," he said. I followed him slowly. He reached the hook by the door where my purse hung. Before I understood what he was doing, he opened it and took out my keys. The sound of them jingling in his hand felt louder than thunder. "What are you doing?" I asked. He didn't meet my eyes. "Mom, I think it's better if I hold on to these for now." For a moment, I thought he was joking. I almost laughed. But he slipped the keys into his pocket, and I saw his jaw tighten. "Sweetheart," I said carefully, "give them back." He shook his head. "Please don't make this harder than it needs to be. I'm doing this because I love you." My throat went dry. Love shouldn't feel like someone closing a door. I've driven for 50 years, I whispered. I drove you to school every day. I drove your father to the hospital. I drove through snowstorms to bring medicine to Grandma. I know how to drive. I know you do, he said, his voice cracking. But you're not the same anymore. Those words, they stayed in the air like smoke. Not the same anymore. I wanted to tell him that none of us are the same. That time changes everyone. That love doesn't mean taking something without asking. But my voice wouldn't come. It hid somewhere deep inside me. Instead, I nodded slowly. If that's what you think is best, I said. He hugged me then, tight and quick. I'll drive you anywhere you need, Mom. I promise. I patted his back like I did when he was little. Okay, I said. But inside, something broke quietly. He stayed another half hour, talking about bills and groceries and how he'd set up deliveries for me. I listened, smiling when he looked at me, nodding like a good mother. When he left, the house felt too big. I walked to the porch and looked at my car sitting there in the afternoon light. The keys weren't in my hand anymore. The road wasn't mine anymore. I stood there a long time, feeling the wind brush my face. I wanted to cry, but no tears came. Just a heavy stillness. I told myself he meant well. I told myself he loved me. I told myself mothers are supposed to understand. But as the sun went down and the sky turned orange, I realized something I didn't want to admit. He hadn't asked me. He had decided for me. And for the first time in my life, in my own house, I felt like a guest who needed permission to live her own day. The first morning without my car keys felt strangely empty, like waking up and realizing someone had taken the clock off the wall. Time still moved, but I couldn't hear it anymore. I reached for my purse out of habit, fingers searching for the familiar jingle that had always greeted me. Nothing. Just the soft rustle of tissues and the cold edge of my glasses case. I stood there for a moment, staring into my bag like something might magically appear if I looked long enough. It didn't. I told myself it was fine. Just a small change. Just a little help from my son. Mothers are supposed to accept help gracefully. That's what we always taught our children, to be kind, to listen, to trust. But kindness doesn't usually leave you feeling so quiet inside. I made my tea and carried it to the porch like always. The maple tree looked the same. The birds still sang. Mrs. Carter walked past with her dog and waved like nothing in the world had changed. I waved back, smiling. I didn't tell her that the road she walked on no longer belonged to me. Around 10 o'clock, I remembered I needed milk. I opened the fridge and saw the empty carton, folded neatly like a reminder. Usually, I would have grabbed my purse, slipped on my shoes, and been back before the kettle cooled. Instead, I stood there with the fridge door open, cold air brushing my face. I picked up the phone and called my son. He answered on the second ring. Hey, Mom. Everything okay? Yes, I said. I need milk. When you have time. There was a pause. Papers shuffled on his end. I'm in the office right now. I can stop by tomorrow evening. Tomorrow. I looked at the empty fridge again. That's fine, I said softly. After I hung up, I closed the fridge and leaned against the counter. It wasn't about milk. It was about needing to ask. I had never asked before. The day stretched long and quiet. I dusted shelves that weren't dusty. I folded towels that were already folded. I watched a TV show without hearing a word of it. Every few minutes, I found myself glancing toward the door, like I was waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. Around noon, the church bells rang faintly from across town. Thursdays used to be choir practice for me. I'd drive there early, sit in the parking lot, and hum the songs before anyone else arrived. Music always helped me breathe better. I picked up my phone and thought about calling Mrs. Carter for a ride. My finger hovered over her name. Then I put the phone down. I didn't want to explain. I didn't want to hear sympathy in her voice. I didn't want to see that look people get when they think you've become fragile. So I stayed home. I reheated leftover soup for lunch and ate it slowly at the kitchen table. The chair across from me stayed empty, just like it had since my husband passed. But that day, the emptiness felt different. It felt heavier, like someone had added another absence to the room. After lunch, I walked to the living room and looked at the photo wall. Birthdays, graduations, vacations. My son in a tiny baseball uniform, smiling with missing teeth. My daughter in her wedding dress. Me and my husband dancing in the backyard with fairy lights strung between trees. I touched one photo gently. I had driven us to all those moments. I had been the one behind the wheel when life needed moving. Later in the afternoon, the phone rang.
It was my friend Helen.
She lives 3 streets away, and we used to meet for coffee every Friday. You coming tomorrow? She asked cheerfully. I swallowed. I don't think so. Why not? You sick? No, just tired. She was quiet for a moment. You sure? Yes, I said quickly. Just tired. After I hung up, I sat on the couch and stared at the carpet. I wasn't tired. I was ashamed. Ashamed that I couldn't go 3 streets away without asking permission. Ashamed that I didn't even try to fight for my own small freedom. Ashamed that my son thought I was weak. And maybe he was right. Evening came slowly. The sunlight faded from the windows, and the house filled with shadows. I turned on lamps in every room, not because I needed the light, but because I couldn't stand the darkness. When you live alone, silence can be loud. It hums in the walls. It echoes in the hallway. It reminds you of everything you've lost. I made myself dinner, toast and eggs, simple and quiet. I carried my plate to the porch and watched cars pass on the road. Headlights glowed like fireflies in the distance. Each car was someone going somewhere, someone living their ordinary life. I used to be one of them. After dinner, I washed my plate and stood by the sink, staring at the empty driveway. My car sat there patiently, like it was waiting for me. I walked outside and touched the door handle. It was cold under my fingers. I'll be back, I whispered, not knowing if I meant it. Inside, I tried to read a book, but the words blurred together. I tried to watch TV, but the voices sounded far away. So I went to bed early, hoping sleep would come quickly. It didn't. I lay there in the dark, listening to the clock tick. Each second felt louder than the last. I thought about my son, about his worried face, about the way he slipped my keys into his pocket without asking. I told myself he loved me. I told myself he was trying to protect me. But love shouldn't make you feel invisible. Tears came quietly then, slipping into my pillow so no one would hear. I cried for my husband, who would have understood. I cried for the years that had passed so quickly. I cried for the little woman I had become in my own home. Sometime after midnight, I sat up and whispered into the dark, I'm still here. No one answered. But I said it again anyway because I needed to hear it. I'm still here. That night, after I whispered into the dark that I was still here, sleep finally came, but not gently. It came in pieces, stitched together with memories. I dreamed of snow. Not the soft snow that looks pretty on postcards, but the thick, blinding kind that covers the road and hides the lines. The kind that makes your hands grip the steering wheel tighter than you ever thought possible. In my dream, I was younger. My hair was dark, my back straight, and my son sat in the passenger seat wrapped in a blanket. He had a fever that wouldn't break, and the doctor's office was 20 miles away. The wind howled, and the tires slipped, but I kept driving. Because that's what mothers do. I woke up with my heart racing, and the taste of old fear in my mouth. The room was quiet again, moonlight falling across the floor like silver water. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. Then I saw the photo on my nightstand and remembered everything. I got up and walked to the living room. When sleep won't come, memories usually do. I opened the wooden chest under the window, the one that holds old papers and photographs and letters tied with faded ribbon. The first thing I found was a picture of me standing beside a little green station wagon. My daughter leaned against me with scraped knees and a missing front tooth. My son held a baseball glove too big for his hand. We were laughing at something I can't remember. I touched the picture and smiled. That car broke down more times than I can count. I learned how to change tires in muddy parking lots. I learned how to check oil with frozen fingers. I learned to drive with babies crying in the back seat and bills piling up in my purse. There was a winter when money was so tight, I worked 2 jobs and still drove my son to early morning practice before the sun came up. I'd sit in the car afterward, sipping cheap coffee, watching the sky turn pink while he ran drills in the cold. He'd come back with red cheeks and bright eyes, thanking me like I'd given him the world. I didn't tell him I was tired. I didn't tell him I was scared. I just drove. Another photo showed my husband in his hospital gown, smiling weakly as I held his hand. That drive to the hospital was the longest of my life. I remember every mile of it. Every red light felt like an enemy. Every turn felt like a prayer. I kept telling him, "We're almost there, honey. Just a little more." He squeezed my hand and said, "You always get us where we need to go." After he passed, I drove alone for the first time. I remember sitting in the driveway, keys trembling in my hand. I almost couldn't start the engine. The world felt too big without him beside me. But I did start it, because life doesn't stop for grief. I drove to work. I drove to the grocery store. I drove to my children's houses to make sure they were okay. Every mile was heavy, but I kept going. I folded another letter in my hands. It was from my son, written in messy handwriting when he was away at college. "Mom," it said, "I miss your driving me everywhere. I didn't know how much you did for us. I love you." I held that letter to my chest and closed my eyes. Somewhere along the road, children forget the miles their mothers travel for them. Not out of cruelty, just out of living. I walked to the window and looked at the empty driveway. My car sat under the porch light, quiet and patient. It looked smaller than I remembered, like it was shrinking without me. I thought about all the places it had taken me. Birthdays, funerals, late-night pharmacy runs, surprise visits, quiet Sunday drives with my husband's hand resting over mine at red lights. That car carried my life. And suddenly, I realized something that made my breath catch. I had never been weak. Not when money was tight. Not when snowstorms came. Not when illness knocked on our door. Not when grief tried to swallow me whole. I had always been strong. Strong enough to drive through fear. Strong enough to carry my family when they needed me. Strong enough to keep moving when everything inside me wanted to stop. So when did I become someone who stayed silent while her own child took her keys? I sat on the couch and let that question settle in my heart. Maybe it was love. Maybe it was fear of losing him. Maybe it was the quiet way society tells women like me that our time has passed. But deep down, I knew something else. I wasn't done. I wasn't done living. I wasn't done speaking. I wasn't done being the woman who got her family where they needed to go. I picked up another photo. This one showed my son on his wedding day. He looked nervous and proud, and I stood beside him holding his arm. After the ceremony, he hugged me and whispered, "I couldn't have done any of this without you." I believed him then, and I still do. Because mothers don't disappear just because their hair turns silver. Our stories don't end because someone else decides they should. I wiped my eyes and smiled through the tears. My hands were older now, my steps slower, my eyesight softer. But my heart was still the same one that drove through snow and fear and heartbreak. I folded the photos carefully and closed the chest. The house felt warmer somehow, like the memories themselves were holding me up. Before going back to bed, I stood by the door where my keys used to hang. The hook looked lonely. I touched it gently. "I remember who I am," I whispered. And for the first time since that Thursday afternoon, the silence in my house didn't feel quite so heavy. Sunday dinners used to be my favorite part of the week. They were noisy and messy and warm, filled with laughter that bounced off the walls and smells that stayed in the curtains for days. Even after my husband passed, I kept the tradition alive. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans with butter, and that apple pie my grandchildren always begged for. That Sunday, I cooked the same meal. Same recipes. Same tablecloth with little blue flowers. Same plates that have tiny cracks from years of use. But nothing felt the same. My son had called the night before. "We'll come around 5, he said. His voice sounded careful, like he was stepping around something fragile. I knew what it was.
The keys.
All morning, I cleaned the house twice. I polished spoons that didn't need polishing. I wiped windows that were already clear. It wasn't about the house. It was about the knot in my chest that wouldn't loosen. At 4:30, I changed into my good dress and brushed my hair. I looked at myself in the mirror and tried to see what my son saw. An old woman with slow hands? A danger behind the wheel?
All I saw was me.
At exactly 5, his truck pulled into the driveway. My grandchildren ran to the door before I could reach it. They wrapped their arms around my waist, laughing, talking all at once about school and cartoons and a loose tooth. I held them close and breathed them in. Children still smell like hope. My daughter-in-law came in carrying a salad bowl. She smiled kindly, kissed my cheek, and said, "The house smells wonderful, Mom." She always calls me Mom. I think she means it. My son came last. He hugged me tight, like he was afraid I might disappear. "You look good," he said softly. "So do you," I answered. We sat at the table, passing plates and bowls. The grandchildren argued over who got the biggest piece of chicken. My daughter-in-law laughed. My son told a story about work. For a few minutes, it felt like old times. But I could feel the silence sitting between us, waiting its turn. Halfway through dinner, my grandson asked, "Grandma, when are you going to drive us to the park again?" My fork froze in my hand. Before I could speak, my son cleared his throat. "Grandma's not driving much these days, buddy. I'll take you." The room went quiet in a way children don't understand. My grandson just shrugged and kept eating, but I felt something inside me fold like paper. I put my fork down carefully. "I can still drive to the park," I said, keeping my voice calm. My son didn't look at me. "Mom, we talked about this." "No," I said softly. "You talked. I listened." My daughter-in-law shifted in her chair. "Maybe we can all just—" "It's about safety," my son interrupted. "We don't want anything to happen." The grandchildren watched us with wide eyes. I forced a smile and said, "Eat your dinner, sweethearts." They did, but slower now. I looked at my son. "Do you think I don't care about safety? Do you think I'd risk your children?" He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "That's not what I'm saying." "Then what are you saying?" I asked. He finally met my eyes. "I'm saying you're older now. Your reflexes aren't what they used to be. It's just reality."
Reality.
That word felt heavy. "I passed my last driving test," I said. "My doctor says I'm fine." He shook his head. "Doctors don't see you every day." "I do." I wanted to ask him when he had last ridden with me. I wanted to ask him why he didn't trust me anymore. But the children were there, and I didn't want their memories of Sunday dinners to be sharp and broken. So I nodded slowly. "Okay." We finished eating quietly. My daughter-in-law cleared plates with quick movements. My grandchildren went to the living room to watch cartoons. I stood at the sink washing dishes. The water ran hot over my hands, and I stared at the soap bubbles like they held answers. My son came up behind me. "Mom, I'm sorry if this is hard." I kept scrubbing. "It is." He hesitated. "I just want you safe." I turned to him then. "Do you know what safety feels like to me?" He looked confused. "Safety feels like being trusted," I said. "Safety feels like being heard. Safety feels like not having things taken without asking." His face tightened. "I didn't take them to hurt you." "I know," I whispered. "But you still took them." We stood there, water running, words hanging between us like laundry in the wind. In the living room, my grandson laughed at something on TV. The sound drifted into the kitchen, bright and careless. Life going on. My daughter-in-law touched my arm gently. Maybe we can look into a driving evaluation together. Just to be sure." Her voice was kind. It wasn't about winning.
It was about peace.
I nodded. "I'd do that." My son looked surprised. "You would?" "Yes," I said, "because I have nothing to hide." For a moment, hope flickered in his eyes. Then he said, "Until then, I'll keep the keys." That small flame went out. We didn't talk about it again that night. We ate pie. We packed leftovers. The grandchildren hugged me goodbye and asked if they could come again next Sunday. Of course, I said, smiling. When the truck drove away, I stood on the porch watching the red taillights disappear down the road. The house felt quiet again. I went inside and sat at the table where crumbs still lay on the plates. I touched the empty chair where my husband used to sit. I tried. I whispered. The clock ticked softly. The dishes cooled in the sink. The smell of apple pie hung in the air like a memory. That Sunday dinner looked like every other one from the outside. But inside my heart, something had shifted. I had spoken a little. And even though my voice was small, I knew it wasn't gone. That night after Sunday dinner, the house felt louder than it had in years. Not with noise, with absence. The grandchildren's laughter still seemed to float in the air, like echoes that didn't know where to land. I picked up stray crumbs from the table, folded napkins, rinsed plates slowly, stretching small tasks into long minutes because I wasn't ready for the quiet waiting upstairs. When I finally turned off the kitchen light, the house slipped into darkness, one room at a time.
It felt like closing doors inside my chest.
I went to bed early, but sleep didn't come. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly, counting each turn like it meant something. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my son's face at the dinner table. Not angry, not cruel, just certain. Certain that I was no longer capable. That certainty hurt more than harsh words ever could. Around midnight, I got up and walked to the living room. The moonlight fell across the rug in pale squares. I sat in my husband's old chair and wrapped his blanket around my shoulders. It still smelled faintly like his aftershave, even after all these years. I don't know what to do, I whispered into the quiet. Talking to him had always been easy. Even when he was alive, he listened more than he spoke. He had a way of making problems feel smaller just by sitting beside me. Now I sat alone. I thought about calling my son. I thought about telling him how much it hurt. But then I imagined his worried voice, his careful explanations, his gentle way of saying he knew better. So I stayed silent. Loneliness isn't always about being alone. Sometimes it's about feeling unseen by the people who love you most. The next morning came gray and slow. Rain tapped softly on the windows like fingers asking to come in. I made oatmeal, but didn't eat much. Food tasted like paper when your heart feels heavy. I picked up an old photo album and sat by the window. Page after page of birthdays and holidays passed under my fingers. There I was, younger, laughing, holding babies, standing behind steering wheels, waving from driver's seats. I stopped at one picture of my son at 16, grinning proudly beside his first car. He had wrapped his arms around me and said, "I couldn't have done this without you teaching me." I remembered that day so clearly. How nervous he was. How many times he stalled at stop signs. How patient I tried to be. I trusted him. Why was it so hard for him to trust me now? I closed the album and wiped my eyes. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was slower. Maybe my hands shook more than I noticed. Maybe I missed things. Doubt is quiet at first. It whispers. It tells you maybe you aren't who you think you are anymore. By afternoon, I decided to clean the closet. It was something I hadn't done in years. I folded old coats, gave away shoes I didn't wear, stacked boxes neatly. At the back, I found a small tin where I kept my husband's letters. He used to write them when he traveled for work. Simple notes about missing me, about how proud he was of the family we built. One letter said, "You're the strongest woman I know. You keep us all moving forward." I held that paper to my chest and cried. Because I didn't feel strong anymore. I felt like someone who needed permission to go buy milk. Evening came early with the rain. I turned on lamps in every room again, chasing shadows that weren't really there. The TV played quietly, but I didn't listen. Around 8, the phone rang. I almost didn't answer, but it was my friend Helen. "You sound tired," she said immediately. "I didn't sleep much," I admitted. She was quiet for a moment. Then she asked gently, "Is this about your son taking your keys?" I froze. "How did you know?" "Honey," she said softly, "small towns don't keep secrets. But that's not why I called. I called because I know you, and you don't sound like yourself." I swallowed hard. Maybe I'm not myself anymore. She didn't answer right away. Then she said something simple that stayed with me. Strong women don't disappear. They just get quiet sometimes. After we hung up, I sat there thinking about that. Was I quiet? Or was I giving up? I went to the window and looked at my car again. Rain ran down its windshield like tears. I remembered every mile I'd driven with that steady confidence in my hands. I remembered who I was. And then I looked at my reflection in the glass. Wrinkled face, tired eyes, gray hair pulled back neatly. Who was I now? I didn't know. That was the hardest part. Not losing the keys. Not missing the grocery store or church. Not even the silence. It was the question sitting in my chest like a stone. If I wasn't the strong woman who drove her family through storms, then who was I? That night, I knelt beside my bed the way my mother taught me as a child. My knees hurt, but I stayed there anyway. God, I whispered. I don't want to be angry. I don't want to be bitter. I just want to know what to do. No voice answered. No sign appeared. But as I sat there, I felt something small and steady rise inside me. Not anger. Not pride. Just a quiet knowing that I wasn't ready to be written off. Not by my son. Not by time. Not by fear. I climbed into bed again and pulled the blanket up to my chin. The rain stopped sometime in the night, and the world went still. For the first time in days, I slept without dreaming. And in that quiet sleep, something inside me rested, gathering strength I didn't even realize I still had. The morning after that restless night, I woke up with a heaviness in my chest, the kind that presses against your ribs and makes it hard to breathe. I sat on the edge of my bed, my feet brushing the cool floor, staring at the wall as if it held answers. For days, I had felt invisible in my own home, my son's decision to take my keys echoing louder than any words we had exchanged. But today, something was different. I didn't know exactly what had shifted, only that the quiet within me had turned into a low hum, a rhythm that demanded I listen. I poured my tea and carried it to the porch as usual. The morning was soft and still, sunlight spilling through the leaves like melted gold. The birds were singing, and for a moment, I allowed myself to feel peace. Then my phone rang. I recognized the number immediately, Helen. "Good morning, honey," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "I thought I'd check on you." "I'm all right," I replied, unsure if I was lying or just testing the words. "Listen," she said, "I know what's going on with your son, and I know it's hard, but you need to remember who you are." Her words lingered in the air, but I didn't respond right away. Who I was, it had felt like a question without an answer lately. Helen continued, softly, "You've always been strong, capable, and brave. You've driven through storms, raised your children alone when needed, and kept your family together. This situation? It doesn't change that. You haven't lost your voice, unless you let it go." Her voice was like a spark in the darkness. A small reminder that I wasn't as powerless as I'd been feeling. After we hung up, I stayed on the porch, cradling my tea, staring at my car parked quietly under the sunlight. I thought about the countless miles I had driven, the storms, the school runs, the hospitals, the grocery trips. I remembered the mornings when my children had climbed into the car, sleepy and wrapped in blankets, trusting me to get them safely to school. I remembered every time I had steered through uncertainty with nothing but determination and love. And then I realized I wasn't finished. I wasn't ready to sit silently while someone decided my life for me. Not my son, not the years, not fear itself. I spent the morning going through old letters, pictures, and keepsakes. Every page I opened, every photograph I held reminded me of who I had been, and more importantly, who I still was. There I was, young but resilient, holding my children through scraped knees and broken hearts. There I was, beside my husband, navigating life together and never letting fear dictate our path. There I was, a woman who had always taken action when needed, and action was what I needed now. By early afternoon, the decision had settled into me like a seed taking root. I would speak up. I would reclaim my voice, gently but firmly. And I would do it not with anger, but with honesty. I started small. I called my daughter-in-law first. I need to talk, I said, my voice calm but steady. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Of course, Mom." "When?" "Soon," I replied. "Just you and me. I need to gather my thoughts." We spoke for half an hour. She listened. She asked questions. She didn't interrupt or judge. When I hung up, I felt lighter, as if some of the weight in my chest had shifted. Next, I wrote down my thoughts for my son. Not an angry letter. Not a list of complaints. Just my feelings, my history, my need to be heard. I wrote about driving him to school through snowstorms, about staying awake all night when he was sick, about the meals, the rides, the small and large acts of love that had defined my life. I wrote about how taking my keys made me feel small, unseen, silenced. When I finished, I read it out loud to the empty living room. My voice shook at first, but with every sentence, it grew stronger. I felt the years of doubt and hesitation fall away, replaced with clarity. I realized that I wasn't asking for permission. I was asking for understanding. I wasn't demanding control. I was reclaiming respect. That afternoon, I stepped outside and walked to the mailbox. I watched the neighborhood move around me. Neighbors mowing lawns, children riding bikes, the mail carrier waving as she passed. Life continued as it always did, but I felt different somehow. I was no longer a quiet observer. I was a participant again, ready to face the conversation that I had avoided for too long. By evening, I felt a mixture of nerves and determination. I set the table for dinner as if preparing for a small battle. Nothing flashy, just the same routine I always followed, but everything in me was poised for the conversation ahead. I wanted my son to understand that I was still capable, that my experience counted, that my life didn't end because he feared for it. When he walked in, I greeted him with a calm smile. "Sit down, please," I said. No hesitation. No shame. Just an invitation to talk like adults. We began slowly, with small talk, laughter, and ordinary details of the day. But under the surface, I was ready, my heart steady. And when the moment came, I spoke, not with anger, not with resentment, but with honesty. I told him about my memories, my life, my pride, and my love. I told him how taking the keys without asking made me feel small, unseen, and unheard. At first, he looked startled, unsure how to respond. I could see his mind racing, trying to reconcile the mother he knew with the woman standing before him. He opened his mouth, paused, then said, "I didn't mean to make you feel that way." "I know," I replied softly, "but I need you to understand. I'm still me. I'm still capable. I'm still your mother. The same woman who drove you, fed you, cared for you, and loved you with every ounce of herself. And that doesn't disappear just because I've aged." He nodded, slowly, absorbing my words. There was silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that comes when truth has been spoken and felt, when hearts begin to meet across a divide. That night, after dinner, I felt a small but undeniable shift inside me. I wasn't entirely free yet, but the seed had been planted. I had reclaimed the first piece of my voice, the courage to speak, the strength to remind my son who I had always been, and the quiet power to begin reclaiming my independence. For the first time in days, I slept with a sense of purpose. Not the restless kind that comes from fear or worry, but the calm, steady certainty that I had not been erased, and I would not allow myself to be. Tomorrow, I told myself, tomorrow I would take the next step. But tonight, I rested knowing that the turning point had arrived. I had remembered who I was and nothing, not fear, not silence, not anyone's good intentions, could take that away. The next morning, the sun broke over the horizon in a gentle, almost forgiving light. I sat on the porch with my coffee, watching the world wake up, feeling the weight of yesterday's courage still settling in my chest. I had spoken my truth to my son the night before. It wasn't a grand victory, no triumphant speeches or dramatic gestures, but it was something far more important: acknowledgement. My voice had been heard. And now, it was time to reclaim more than that. It was time to reclaim my independence, my life, and the quiet confidence that had carried me through decades of challenges. I thought about the small steps I could take first. I wouldn't rush, but I also wouldn't wait. Every moment I hesitated felt like handing over pieces of myself to fear. I started with my car. Sitting behind the wheel again felt foreign at first. The seat felt too stiff, the steering wheel slightly unfamiliar under my fingers. But I remembered the countless mornings, the snow, the rain, the late-night drives. I remembered the sense of purpose, the feeling of being trusted with the lives of my family, and the rhythm of the world outside. I slid the key into the ignition. The familiar jingle echoed in the quiet morning like a small anthem. My son had left it on the hook the night before, with an almost apologetic look when he saw me glance at it. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. My car, was mine again. I started with a slow drive down the street. The tires crunched over the gravel, the engine humming beneath me. My hands gripped the wheel naturally, the same way they had for decades. I felt alive, not because I was defying my son, but because I was remembering who I was. Independence doesn't come from denying help. It comes from knowing you can still stand on your own. The neighborhood seemed different that day. Children played on lawns with squeals of delight. Neighbors tended to gardens, and the mail carrier waved. Life continued outside my windows, bustling, bright, and careless. But I felt a part of it again, connected to the pulse of ordinary life, to the sense that my actions mattered, not just for myself, but for those I love. When I returned home, I felt lighter, though the emotional work was far from over. I made a list of small goals, each one a step toward reclaiming the parts of my life that had quietly slipped away. Driving to church without waiting for approval, running errands on my schedule, planning small outings with the grandchildren. Each item was more than a task. It was a declaration that I was still capable, still present, still deserving of autonomy. That afternoon, I invited my daughter-in-law to join me for tea. She accepted with a warm smile, and we sat in the sunlit kitchen, cups in hand. I told her about my drive, the way the engine felt, the sense of freedom that came with being behind the wheel again. She listened carefully, nodding, and I felt an unexpected validation in her attention. No judgment, no warning. Just acknowledgement that my feelings and my independence mattered. Later, my son came by. We spoke again, this time without the tension of fear looming over every word. He admitted he had acted out of concern, but he also listened as I explained how taking my keys, however well-intentioned, had made me feel powerless. We didn't resolve everything in one conversation, but something shifted between us, a subtle understanding that respect and care could coexist. That evening, I stood on the porch watching the sky turn amber and purple. I thought about the decades behind me, every mile driven, every worry shouldered, every night spent awake with children or loved ones in need. Those years had built the woman I was today. And no single act, even one done out of love, could erase them. I realized then that reclaiming my voice wasn't just about my son or my keys. It was about all the moments in life where I had stayed quiet, deferred, or let fear dictate my choices. Reclaiming my voice meant stepping back into my life fully, insisting gently but firmly that my experiences, my decisions, and my capabilities mattered. I began making small plans. I'd drive to the grocery store, yes, but also to visit old friends, to take long walks through neighborhoods I had once explored, to bring the grandchildren to the park under my guidance. I wouldn't ask for permission. I would simply act with care and awareness, as I always had. The next few days were filled with small victories. A trip to the pharmacy, without hesitation. Picking up a few items at the market while chatting with the cashier. Driving to the post office and waving at familiar neighbors. Each action felt like reclaiming a thread of myself, stitching the fabric of independence back into my life. By the end of the week, I noticed a change in my son's demeanor as well. He approached me not with tension, but with cautious respect. He asked if I needed help, yes, but he no longer assumed he had to take control. Our interactions became less about fear and more about collaboration. He began to see me not as fragile, but as resilient, still capable, still strong, still the woman who had carried a family through storms and long nights. That evening, I sat alone in the living room, sipping my tea. I thought about the journey I had taken. Not the physical drives, but the emotional miles, from silence to acknowledgement, from doubt to determination, from fear to reclaimed confidence. I felt a profound sense of peace, not because the world had changed, but because I had remembered who I was. The turning point, I realized, wasn't just in reclaiming my car or my keys. It was in reclaiming my voice, my self-respect, and my belief in my own strength. I had faced doubt, fear, and silence, and I had emerged with clarity. Life would continue, with its small tensions, worries, and challenges. But I knew now that I could navigate them on my terms. I would drive, speak, act, and live with the quiet authority that comes from knowing your worth. And that night, as I closed the blinds and listened to the world outside, I whispered to myself, I am still here. I am still me. And I will be heard. For the first time in what felt like a long time, I went to bed not with anxiety or fear, but with hope, purpose, and the steady assurance that the woman I had always been was still very much alive. By the time Friday came around, I had spent the better part of the week rebuilding myself quietly. I drove to the grocery store without hesitation, ran errands, and even visited a neighbor who had recently been ill. Each step reminded me that life continued, that I was capable, and that independence wasn't something I had lost. It was something I had temporarily allowed to be overshadowed by fear and well-meaning interference. Yet, despite the small victories, one challenge remained, my son. We hadn't spoken in depth since the initial discussion the previous Sunday. There had been polite exchanges, the usual, "How was your day?" conversations, but nothing that truly addressed the lingering tension.
I knew it was time.
Not tomorrow, not next week, today. I prepared for the conversation the way I would prepare for a long drive through unfamiliar roads. I thought about what I wanted to say, not in anger, but in honesty. I reminded myself that my goal wasn't to blame or fight, but to be understood. I wanted my son to see me, not just as his mother, but as the woman who had driven him to every practice, cheered at every recital, stayed awake through countless nights of worry, and carried a family through storms of all kinds. I made him a cup of tea and waited until he came home from work. When he arrived, he paused at the doorway, noticing my calm demeanor. "Mom," he said, curiosity and caution in his voice. "Come sit," I said softly. "I want to talk." We sat at the kitchen table. The house smelled faintly of baked bread I had prepared earlier, comforting and ordinary. The grandchildren were at a friend's house, leaving the space open for a private conversation, a rare moment of uninterrupted presence. "I want to talk about the keys," I began, keeping my tone even. "Not to argue, not to blame, but because I need you to understand how it felt." His expression shifted. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table, eyes attentive.
Okay, Mom.
"I'm listening." I took a deep breath. "When you took my keys without asking, I didn't just lose the car. I lost my sense of independence, my sense of trust. I felt small, unseen, and silenced. You might think you were protecting me, but it made me feel like my experience and judgment didn't matter anymore." He looked down at the table, rubbing his hands together. "Mom, I didn't mean to make you feel that way. I was worried about your safety, that's all." "I know," I said gently. "I understand your concern. But there's a difference between concern and control. I need to feel trusted. I need to know that the woman who has driven through snow, fear, and sleepless nights can still make her own decisions, especially about things she has done safely for decades." There was a pause, long enough for both of us to collect our thoughts. Then he said quietly, "I guess I never realized how much that hurt you. I thought I was helping."
"You were trying," I replied.
But sometimes, trying can unintentionally take away what someone needs most, their voice. He nodded slowly.
"I see that now."
"I really do." I felt a small swell of relief, but didn't let it overwhelm me. "I don't want to argue or make you feel guilty. I just want us to understand each other. I want you to see that even though I am older, I am still capable. I am still your mother, and I still deserve respect and trust." He met my eyes, and for the first time in days, I saw a glimmer of understanding. "You're right, Mom. I shouldn't have acted without talking to you first."
I
I lost sight of that. We spent the next hour talking, really talking, about our fears, our memories, and our expectations. I shared stories of driving him to school through blizzards, the times I had stayed awake all night when he or his sister was sick, the countless errands, rides, and responsibilities I had carried without complaint. I reminded him of the letters he had written as a child, expressing gratitude and love for all I had done. He listened, not defensively, not dismissively, but with a quiet respect that I hadn't felt in weeks. And as he listened, I could feel the tension between us begin to dissolve, replaced by understanding and a renewed sense of connection. "I never realized how much those little things mattered," he said finally, his voice soft. "I thought I was helping, but I see now how I was taking from you instead." "Yes," I said, "sometimes help can feel like control. But trust is different. Trust empowers, it doesn't diminish." By the end of our conversation, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't just about the keys anymore, it was about the larger truth that I had allowed fear, habit, and assumptions to silence me for far too long. Speaking up, reclaiming my voice, and being heard had awakened something deep inside me, a renewed sense of self, a reminder that my life, my experience, and my autonomy still mattered. Later that evening, as we cleared the dishes together, I noticed my son's gestures were different, more respectful, more attentive. There was no tension, no underlying fear, just a shared understanding that had been missing for far too long. After he left for the night, I sat in my living room, the house quiet except for the ticking of the clock. I reflected on the week, the conversations, and the small victories. I realized that reclaiming my voice wasn't about confrontation or anger. It was about honesty, patience, and courage. It was about standing in my truth, gently but firmly, and allowing those around me to see and respect it. That night, I went to bed with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. The weight of doubt had lifted slightly, replaced by confidence and clarity. I knew the journey wasn't over. There would still be challenges, misunderstandings, and fears, but I had taken the first true step toward being fully heard and fully seen again. I whispered to myself as I closed my eyes, "I am still here. I am still strong. I am still capable. And I will be heard." For the first time in weeks, sleep came gently, carrying me into dreams where I was not small, not silent, but fully alive, driving through life with the quiet certainty of a woman who had reclaimed her voice, her independence, and her self-respect. The days following our deep conversation felt different. The tension that had been lingering in my home for weeks seemed to have lifted, replaced by a fragile but genuine sense of understanding. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but the air felt lighter, and I could finally breathe without the tight knot of frustration and sadness pressing against my chest. I realized that reclaiming my voice wasn't just about asserting myself, it was about healing the relationship I had with my son. For too long, fear and good intentions had created a silent wall between us. My voice had been muffled, not by a lack of strength, but by concern and assumption that I should step back because of age. Now, the bridge was being rebuilt, plank by plank, with honesty, patience, and love. One afternoon, I decided to invite my son over for lunch. I kept the menu simple: roasted chicken, vegetables, and mashed potatoes, the same comfort food I had always prepared for Sunday dinners. I wanted the setting to be familiar, warm, and safe, a place where hearts could open without feeling judged or pressured. When he arrived, I greeted him at the door. There was a brief, awkward pause before he smiled, a small, tentative gesture, but it was genuine. It carried the weight of unspoken apologies and the possibility of understanding. "Hi, Mom," he said softly. "Hi, sweetie," I replied, holding his gaze without flinching. "Come in." We moved to the kitchen, where I had set the table with care. The sunlight streamed through the window, casting a golden glow across the plates and cups. It was ordinary, but it felt symbolic. Ordinary moments, after all, were the foundation of extraordinary connections. As we ate, the conversation flowed naturally. We talked about his work, my neighbor's new puppy, and the grandchildren's upcoming school projects. Laughter returned in small doses, tentative but bright, like sunlight breaking through clouds. I watched him as he spoke, noticing how his gestures were softer, more deliberate, how he seemed to listen as much as he spoke. After the meal, we moved to the living room. I suggested sitting by the window, where the afternoon light created a warm, quiet corner. "I want to talk more about us," I said. "About our relationship." He nodded. "I'd like that." I began slowly, recounting some of the moments from my life, drives through storms, sleepless nights when he or his sister were sick, times when I had quietly managed the household and the family's challenges. I didn't speak to accuse or guilt him. I spoke to remind him of who we were together and who I had been all those years. "I've always tried to protect you," he admitted quietly. "But I didn't realize that protecting you could make you feel powerless." I reached for his hand and held it gently. "I know your intentions were good. But sometimes, even when we love someone, we can take away their strength without meaning to. I need you to understand that trust, respect, and independence are part of love too." He looked down at our joined hands, then back up at me. "I see that now. I see how much I underestimated your abilities, how much I underestimated you as a person, still capable, still strong, still my mother." The words hit me softly, like warm rain. They weren't dramatic. They weren't overly emotional. But they were honest, and honesty heals in ways that grand gestures cannot. We talked for hours, sharing memories, regrets, and hopes for the future. We laughed about old family mishaps and cried over losses that had shaped us. I felt the invisible wall between us dissolve, replaced by the quiet understanding that comes when two people truly see each other. Over the next few days, the change in our relationship became more evident. My son began consulting me instead of making assumptions. He asked my opinion on matters both big and small, from household decisions to planning family gatherings. He didn't just hear my words, he respected them. I noticed subtle shifts too. He was less protective in a way that had felt controlling. He allowed me space to act, to make decisions, to reclaim my independence. And I, in turn, trusted him more, knowing that his concern came from love, not judgment. One evening, after a quiet dinner, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, reflecting on how far we had come. I realized that the process of reclaiming my voice and independence had not only strengthened me but had also opened the door to a deeper, healthier relationship with my son. We were learning to coexist with respect, understanding, and genuine care. It was in that quiet moment that I fully appreciated the journey I had been on. The fear, doubt, and frustration I had carried for weeks had been necessary. They had brought me to the point where I could assert myself and speak honestly. And in doing so, I had not only reclaimed my own life, but also healed a bond that meant more to me than anything. I knew the future would have challenges. There would still be disagreements, small misunderstandings, and moments of tension. But I also knew that we had laid the foundation for navigating those moments with respect, communication, and love. And that foundation was stronger than any fear, any doubt, or any moment of control. That night, I went to bed feeling a peace I hadn't known in a long time. I felt the quiet strength of a woman who had faced fear, reclaimed her voice, and restored a meaningful connection with her child. I realized that independence, respect, and love could coexist, not just in theory, but in the reality of our lives. As I drifted into sleep, I whispered to myself, "We are stronger than fear. We are stronger than silence. And we are still family, still connected, still able to love with honesty and courage." The house was quiet, but I no longer felt alone. I had reclaimed more than my voice. I had reclaimed my place in my family, my sense of self, and the confidence to live fully, openly, and with love. And for the first time in weeks, I felt truly whole. The morning sunlight spilled into my bedroom like a promise. I woke up with a quiet certainty I hadn't felt in weeks. The tension that had shadowed my days, the doubts that had gnawed at my confidence, and the heaviness of silence that lingered in my home had begun to lift. The conversation with my son, the reclaiming of my voice, and the steps I had taken to assert my independence had started to ripple outward, transforming not just my life, but the way I experienced every ordinary moment. I made my way to the kitchen, where I poured myself a cup of coffee. The aroma filled the room and reminded me that some comforts never fade, even when life shifts around you. I took a slow sip and looked out the window. The garden was waking up, leaves glistening with dew, the sun painting long shadows across the lawn. Birds flitted from branch to branch, calling to one another in lively bursts of song. The world continued to move forward, but now I felt ready to move with it rather than letting it pass me by. That day, I decided to drive to the park with my grandchildren. Their laughter and excitement had always been a part of my life's rhythm, but lately, I had felt excluded from the simple joys of taking them to swing, slide, and run freely across the grass. I called them in the morning to let them know I was coming by. The squeals of delight that erupted from the other end of the line reminded me why I had always loved these little adventures. I prepared sandwiches, packed juice boxes, and made sure the small picnic blanket was neatly folded. As I placed the sandwiches in the basket, I thought about how much independence and trust mattered, not just to me, but to my relationships. Trust isn't merely about safety. It's about mutual respect, confidence, and the ability to act without fear that your choices will be dismissed. Today, I would practice that both for myself and for those I loved. When I arrived at my grandchildren's house, their faces lit up at the sight of me. They ran to the car, chattering endlessly about school, cartoons, and little triumphs of the week. I smiled, letting their energy wash over me. I had driven to this moment on my own, and it felt like reclaiming something precious, a piece of my life that fear had almost taken away. The drive to the park was smooth, each turn and stop reminding me of all the miles I had logged over decades. The air felt fresher than ever, filled with the scent of morning dew, fresh grass, and hope. My grandchildren sang songs in the back seat, their voices blending with the hum of the tires against the pavement. I realized that independence and freedom weren't just about driving. They were about participating fully in life, embracing moments, and letting joy in without hesitation. At the park, we set up the blanket and laid out the sandwiches. My grandchildren ran toward the swings and slides, their laughter echoing across the open space. I watched them, my heart swelling with love, pride, and a renewed sense of purpose. I felt included again, not as a visitor or bystander, but as an active participant in their lives. As I sat there, I thought about my son. I realized that the journey to reclaim my voice had also healed part of our relationship. We had learned to communicate, to understand, and to respect one another's perspectives. Our bond was no longer strained by fear or miscommunication. Instead, it was strengthened by honesty, patience, and courage, the same qualities I had relied on to reclaim myself. Later, when the children grew tired from playing, we sat together on the blanket, eating sandwiches and sipping juice. They leaned against me, talking quietly, asking questions about school and stories from my own childhood. I answered each one with patience and warmth, savoring the moments that had once seemed out of reach. I realized that these small, ordinary experiences were the true markers of independence, not merely the ability to drive a car, but the ability to engage, participate, and nurture relationships fully. On the drive home, my grandchildren sang softly in the back seat. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw their smiles, their trust, and their joy. It struck me how closely our sense of independence is tied to our connections with others. Reclaiming my voice had not only restored my confidence, but had also allowed me to be fully present in their lives, to participate in shared experiences without hesitation or doubt. That evening, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the sky turn shades of pink, purple, and gold. I reflected on the journey I had been on, the fear, the silence, the doubt, and finally, the reclamation of my voice and independence. Each step had been small, deliberate, and meaningful. Each moment of courage had allowed me to rebuild not just my relationship with my son, but also my relationship with myself. I realized that independence isn't a single act or moment. It's a series of choices, a willingness to speak, act, and participate fully in life despite fear or doubt. It's the courage to claim your place in the world while nurturing the connections that matter most. Today, I had taken another step on that path, and the sense of accomplishment and peace was profound. Later that night, as I prepared for bed, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. I had reclaimed not just my keys, but my voice, my autonomy, and my confidence. I had restored my relationship with my son, strengthened my bond with my grandchildren, and rediscovered the joy of ordinary life. I whispered softly to myself, "This is a new beginning." And as I drifted into sleep, I felt a quiet certainty that no challenge, fear, or doubt could take away the strength I had reclaimed. I was still here, fully present, fully capable, and ready to embrace life with the courage and grace that had always been a part of me. This was more than just the end of a difficult week. It was a turning point, a promise to myself that my voice would never again be silenced, my independence would never be questioned without conversation, and my presence in the lives of those I loved would be active, engaged, and cherished. The days ahead would have their challenges, but for the first time in a long while, I faced them with clarity, confidence, and peace. I had reclaimed not only my voice and independence, but also my ability to live fully, to love openly, and to embrace life as it came. And in that, I found a new beginning, one filled with hope, strength, and the quiet joy of being truly seen and heard. The days that followed the reclamation of my voice were calmer, lighter, and yet profoundly rich with reflection. I found myself waking up earlier, taking a few quiet moments on the porch with a cup of tea, and simply watching the world around me. Birds flitted from tree to tree, neighbors waved as they went about their routines, and the sun spilled its warmth across the rooftops. These ordinary sights, once overlooked in the rush of daily life and the tension that had haunted me, now felt like reminders of how much life still held for me. I realized that the past few weeks had taught me more than I could have anticipated. The struggle with my son over the keys was not merely about a car. It was a mirror reflecting deeper truths about independence, trust, and communication. I understood now that reclaiming my voice wasn't just an act of defiance, it was an act of self-respect. It was a declaration that age, love, or even fear could not diminish my value, my judgment, or my place in my family. I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. At first, I had felt powerless, silenced by assumptions and worry. Loneliness had crept in quietly, filling spaces with doubt and self-questioning. I had allowed my own confidence to erode, believing, for a fleeting moment, that I was no longer capable of handling everyday responsibilities or decisions. But through those nights of restlessness, the long walks around the neighborhood, and the quiet talks with friends like Helen, I rediscovered a truth I had always known. Strength isn't defined by absence of fear. It is defined by the courage to act in spite of it. One afternoon, I found myself at my kitchen table, flipping through an old photo album. There were pictures of birthdays, school events, family vacations, and quiet afternoons spent together. I lingered on a photo of my son as a child, proud and wide-eyed beside his first bicycle, and I felt a warmth in my chest. I remembered the patience it had taken to teach him balance, to guide him when he wobbled, and to celebrate every small victory. Those memories were more than nostalgia. They were evidence of my capabilities, proof that my experience and judgment mattered long before the keys had become an issue. I also reflected on my own growth. The fear and frustration I had felt were not signs of weakness. They were signals, nudging me to reclaim control, to speak honestly, and to act decisively. I realized that independence is not a gift given by others. It is claimed through courage, clarity, and persistence. Every small action, the drive to the park, the preparation of meals, the quiet conversations, had been a brick in the foundation of my renewed confidence. My relationship with my son had evolved too. We had learned to communicate openly, to listen without judgment, and to respect one another's perspectives. There was still work to be done. Misunderstandings might arise, and habits are not changed overnight, but the foundation of mutual respect had been restored. I understood now that relationships flourish not in silence or avoidance, but in honest conversation and acknowledgement of one another's experiences and feelings. I also discovered the importance of patience, not just with others, but with myself. I had spent years measuring my worth by the expectations of those around me, often trying to anticipate needs, prevent problems, and manage outcomes. While these efforts were made out of love, they sometimes left me exhausted and overlooked. Learning to assert my voice, to act with intention, and to set boundaries was not just empowering, it was essential to maintaining my own well-being and peace of mind. One evening, I walked to the park alone, letting the cool air brush against my face. The world was quiet except for the distant laughter of children and the rustle of leaves. I reflected on the lessons learned. That trust must be mutual, that independence is a right, not a favor, and that silence, when imposed by fear or assumption, diminishes the spirit. I felt a deep gratitude for the journey, the challenges, the doubts, the quiet nights of introspection. All of it had led me to this place of clarity and empowerment. I also thought about the future. I would continue to drive, to make decisions for myself, and to participate fully in life. I would engage with my grandchildren, share stories, and create moments that mattered. I would speak up when needed, not with anger or bitterness, but with honesty and love. And I would continue to nurture my relationship with my son, grounded in respect and understanding, knowing that strong bonds are built on open hearts and honest voices. In my heart, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I had learned that strength is not diminished by age, that independence is not negotiable, and that love does not require silence. I had discovered that reclaiming one's voice is not just about being heard. It is about reclaiming agency, dignity, and self-respect. That night, as I prepared for bed, I sat by the window and looked at the stars. The quiet twinkle above reminded me that life is vast, full of possibilities, and that even in the smallest moments, there is power. I whispered softly, I am still capable. I am still present. I am still loved. And I will continue to live fully. I drifted into sleep with a sense of peace, knowing that the journey of reclaiming my voice had given me not only independence, but also wisdom. I understood that challenges would come again. Relationships are never static, life is never predictable, but I was prepared. Prepared to speak, to act, and to live authentically. Prepared to navigate future storms with calm, patience, and resilience. The next morning, I awoke with energy and clarity. I decided to visit my friends, catch up with neighbors, and plan a small outing with my grandchildren. Every choice felt intentional, a reflection of the lessons I had learned. I understood that life was not just to be lived, it was to be embraced fully, with courage, honesty, and love. In the weeks that followed, my home felt lighter, brighter, and more connected. Conversations with my son were easier, filled with warmth, laughter, and mutual respect. My grandchildren's visits became more joyful, marked by shared stories, games, and quiet moments together. I found myself participating fully, no longer hesitant or second-guessing my place. The most profound lesson I carried forward was simple yet powerful. Reclaiming one's voice is a journey, not a single act. It requires courage, reflection, patience, and honesty. But the reward is immeasurable, a renewed sense of self, strengthened relationships, and the quiet, unshakable knowledge that one's life, decisions, and experiences matter. As I settled into bed each night, I would reflect on the day, whispering gratitude for the growth, the understanding, and the courage that had brought me here. I felt a quiet pride, not for defiance or conflict, but for reclaiming my voice, my independence, and the authenticity of my life. I realized that life, even with its challenges, had never truly limited me. It had only tested my willingness to stand firm, to speak honestly, and to act with intention. And now, having embraced those lessons, I faced the future with confidence, love, and a newfound sense of empowerment. This was more than a resolution, it was a new way of living. A way of moving forward with respect for myself, for my family, and for the life I had always deserved. And in that quiet, steadfast determination, I knew that whatever came next, I would meet it fully, courageously, and with my voice intact, clear, and strong.